Hi guys, we're taking another look at another 5-minute book review, and today we're going to be doing Prince Caspian by C.S. Lewis. So the story picks up with the four Pevensies children returning to Narnia, and they find their former castle, Caerphilly, in ruins, and there they find a storehouse where they retrieve the gifts that they had received in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Next they meet a dwarf named Trumpkin, who tells them that the land of Narnia is ruled by an evil king named Miraz, and his nephew is Caspian, the titular Prince Caspian in the story, who is the heir to their throne, but Miraz has killed his father and is sympathetic towards his nephew up until the birth of his own son. Then he kind of becomes more antagonistic towards Caspian. Caspian is tutored by Dr. Cornelius, who tells him about the Old Narnians, who are talking animals, and about Aslan, who is the Christ figure from The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Caspian learns of his uncle's plot to want to kill him, so he flees into the forest, and there he is awakened by some of the Old Narnians who are talking animals. So the talking animals take Caspian to a place called Aslan's How, which is kind of a headquarters for the resistance to Miraz. So the Pevensies children are making their way to Aslan's How, too, under the leadership of Lucy, who says she can see Aslan. She's the only one who can. Edmund believes her, but Peter and Susan do not. So when the children get to Aslan's How, they are confronted by Miraz and his forces and the forces of Caspian and the other Old Narnians, and Peter challenges Miraz to a duel. So the fight breaks down between Miraz and Peter, and ultimately Miraz is killed by one of his own henchmen, and a battle ensues. Aslan wakes up Bacchus and Silenus, who are gods of the Narnian forest, and that turns the battle in the favor of the Old Narnians, and they ultimately defeat the Telmarines. The book concludes with the option of the Telmarines to either go back to Earth or to stay in Narnia. Some go back and some stay, and Caspian is crowned king, and then ultimately the Pevensies children are returned back to Earth. Faith is a central part of this story and is mainly played out in the character of Lucy and Caspian, but other characters have their own faith arcs as well. And Lucy, she is originally the only one that is able to see Aslan, but eventually others are able to as well because of her faith. She's able to convince more people that Aslan is there, and that ultimately helps them win the fight at the end of the story. Caspian, under the tutelage of his mentor Cornelius and some of the servants at his palace, become convinced that the Old Narnians are the rightful inhabitants of Narnia, and he changes to their side in the fight against Miraz and ultimately becomes their king at the end of the story. We also see the skepticism of Trumpkin, who originally believes that Aslan doesn't exist, but ultimately comes to believe that he does. Lastly, we see the faith of Edmund, who didn't believe Lucy in the first story when she said that Narnia existed, but in the second story he had learned from his mistakes, and he believes that she can see Aslan even though Peter and Susan do not. We also see this played out in the restoration of the Old Narnians. They represent the old religion that was restored after Miraz and his forces are defeated. So with all these characters coming to grips with different aspects of faith, and then the restoration of the old religion and the restoration of the Old Narnias really helps shape the central theme of this. There are other themes, but that particular one is well played out and is well done in the story for a lot of different reasons. So let's go ahead and score this to see what it looks like. So for character development, I gave this book a 3, mostly because I think that all the characters are basically dealing with the same thing. They're dealing with some aspect of faith. Now, there's a little bit of nuance in how they each respond to that, but beyond that, we really don't see a lot of multi-dimensional characters. We see a bunch of one-dimensional characters, so it makes the character development feel a little bit flat across the board. The thematic development of this story, I think, is spot on, though, because we do see the elements of faith being played out in a lot of different ways. I think that C.S. Lewis does a really good job of driving that point home without getting too preachy about it. So I gave this one a 5 for thematic development. So the plot development in the story I thought was good up to a point. It's one of the few in the Chronicles of Narnia where you had a couple of different plot lines going on and they kind of come together. But at the end of the novel, you literally have God out of the machine, deus ex machina, where Bacchus and Silenus are awakened to awaken the force, which turns the battle in the favor of the Old Narnians. To me, that it was kind of a cheesy move to kind of resolve the conflict in this story. So for conflict, I gave this one a 5, mainly because I think that the stakes are high in this story, and I think the conflict really does help serve the thematic development where you have a central conflict, the interpersonal conflict, and then also the personal conflict of all the characters supporting that central idea of developing faith and the restoration of old religion in this story. So the setting in this book, I think, is well done. It is Narnia, and C.S. Lewis does a great job of depicting this world and describing and painting word pictures and filling this world with a lot of different details and color and a lot of different characters that make it a very interesting world. I think that setting does help serve the thematic development quite a bit with the restoration of Old Narnia. So the readability of the story is fantastic. C.S. Lewis is just a phenomenal writer, and he does a great job of pacing the story and making word pictures come to life. This book can appeal to adults and to young readers alike. It's not strictly children's fiction, although it's more intended for that. So I think anybody can pick this up and really enjoy this book regardless of where they're at in the reading spectrum. So for entertainment value, I think this story is a fantastic read. I really did enjoy reading it. It's a great story. It does have the ability to capture the imagination for adults and children alike. It's been adapted to stage, and there's a feature-length movie for it as well. So a lot of people do enjoy this book, and I certainly did. So all in all, I think this is a strong installment in the series. I'm going to give it a possible 29 out of 35. I think it's a good book for a lot of reasons, mostly from its thematic development. And it's also just a fun read. Even if it's lacking in some character and plot development, I think the rest of it really does make up for those particular aspects. And it's an enjoyable read. I think it can be engaging for anybody. So I'd definitely give this book a recommendation for anybody that's wanting to read a series, read the Chronicles of Narnia. This is just going to be one of the installments in that particular series. And it's also a strong one for that matter.